Good evening, dear travellers. Tonight, we'll drift into a tale adapted from the brothers Grimm, a whispered narrative of moonlit paths and mysterious secrets. It's designed to lull you into deep rest, so settle in with your favourite blanket, let your breathing slow, and allow the soft hush of storytelling to cradle you into slumber. Imagine a quaint village nestled at the edge of an ancient forest. By day, the sun warms cobblestone streets and slanting rooftops, revealing little shops and wooden carts filled with goods. Among these humble merchants, one stands out, a kindly father whose sturdy stall and cheerful banter draw neighbours and travellers alike. He deals in spices, simple wares and daily necessities, nothing too grand, yet enough to keep him comfortably prosperous. His home, a cosy house beside the market square, bustles with warmth. Inside, his daughter tends to morning tasks, her soft laughter rising above the crackle of hearth fire. She's known for her gentle nature and the curiosity that sparks in her eyes whenever a new story or traveller graces their doorstep. Often she assists her father with the day's accounting or welcomes guests to share a meal, never suspecting the forest beyond might hold more than its usual rustle of winds and birds. As evening falls, the village hushes. Lantern lights gleam in windows, and the merchant shutters his stall with practiced ease, humming a tune he learned in his youth. Across the way, the silhouette of the great forest stretches into the twilight, its secrets hidden behind tall pines and twisting brambles. Lulled by the village's gentle rhythm, neither father nor daughter senses the faint echo of something stirring among the ancient oaks. For now, their world is safe and serene, resting on the cusp of night, awaiting the story yet to unfold. Chapter 1. A hush settled over the village as the evening light waned. The last crimson streak of sunset painted long shadows across the cobbled streets, and lanterns flickered to life in the gathering dusk. Inside a snug house at the edge of town, the merchant's daughter stood by a window, absently tracing the cool glass with her fingertip. She had never been one for idle dreaming, yet tonight a curious restlessness stirred in her chest. Her father had spoken excitedly all week of a mysterious suitor who would arrive at dusk. The merchant's words brimmed with praise for this man's wealth, his refined manners, and the bright future he promised. But the daughter felt an unexplainable tremor beneath her heart, a quiet warning she could not name. She glanced at her reflection in the glass and thought, "Am I being too cautious?" Even so, the thought did little to soothe her apprehension. A sharp knock at the door sent a jolt through the silence. Candles trembled in the dark as the merchant hurried to open it. There, standing tall in the wan glow of the threshold, was a figure dressed in elegant attire, rich velvet coat, gleaming boots, and a carefully tied cravat. In his hand rested a velvet pouch. Gold thread glinted along its seams. "Good evening," he murmured, in a voice like silk. The merchant welcomed him eagerly, pride colouring his cheeks. When he introduced his daughter, the stranger's eyes took on a strange gleam. Though he smiled with polished charm, something in his gaze felt distant, as though it resided in a darker place she could not see. He spoke with the practiced ease of a man who knew how to make words dance, praising the cozy home, admiring the girl's delicate features, and promising a life of comfort and fine things. With a flourish, he opened the velvet pouch, letting a cascade of jeweled hairpins and glinting bracelets spill across the table. Gasps rose in the tiny room. Even the candlelight seemed enchanted by the brilliance. The merchant beamed, delighted by the display of generosity. He spoke of blessings and good fortune, scarcely able to contain his excitement. Yet the daughter felt that uneasy rhythm thrumming in her chest, a warning she struggled to ignore. She managed a polite smile, though her heart pounded beneath her bodice. When at last the stranger spoke of marriage, her father happily agreed, all but clasping the man's hands in gratitude. Though her tongue felt heavy, the daughter lowered her eyes in silent acceptance. She did not dare voice her doubt, even as the suitor reached for her hand and pressed upon it a delicate ring, its silver band snug against her trembling finger. That night, alone in her chamber, she gazed at her new token. Its shining surface seemed to wink at her in the candlelight. Yet no matter how she turned it, she could not shake the faint chill creeping down her spine, nor the dark wonder if all that glitters might bear a hidden shadow. Chapter 2. Evening draped the merchant's house in soft candlelight as the daughter stood behind her father's chair, her hands clasped nervously. Across the wooden table sat the bridegroom, looking at ease in the warm glow that flickered over his elegantly tailored coat. Moments earlier, in a swirl of polite conversation, her father had agreed that his daughter's hand should indeed be given in marriage. It happened quickly, so quickly the words still rang in her ears. She remembered how her father's enthusiasm had spilled over, showering gratitude on this mysterious stranger who offered such lavish gifts. Now the bridegroom's gaze lingered on her. Though he wore a charming smile, something about his demeanor made her skin prickle. He sipped from a steaming cup of spiced wine, then set it down with practiced grace. "My dear," he said, addressing both the father and daughter as he inclined his head, "I must share more of my plans for the wedding. My home lies deep in the forest, farther from the busy roads of this village, but it is an ideal setting for a grand celebration." The father beamed. "It is most generous that you invite us. We seldom venture beyond the old oak groves. I've heard rumors of that place. Secluded, yes, but strikingly beautiful." At this, the bridegroom's eyes darted back to the daughter. "Quite so. However, the forest's paths can be perilous after dark. I propose she come to my estate soon, to meet my household and begin making arrangements." She glanced down, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. The mere mention of travelling alone to a remote woodland cabin sent an icy ripple through her. Her father, noticing her unease, patted her hand gently. "Don't worry, child. It's all quite proper." The bridegroom nodded. "I'll make sure she has clear directions. The route is straightforward if one is careful." A silence stretched between them. The father broke it with a nervous laugh, standing to show their guest out. "Please, excuse our modest home," he said. "We have little practice in hosting such fine visitors." "Nonsense," the bridegroom replied politely. "Your hospitality is most appreciated." He bowed to the daughter, who could only manage a quiet nod. As he left, he pressed a folded parchment into her hand, his voice dropping low. "Follow this path precisely, my dear. The forest can be unkind to wanderers." No sooner had the door shut behind him than the father exclaimed, "How fortunate you are, a man of stature and wealth, taking such an interest in you." She swallowed, forcing a smile she did not feel. "Yes, father," she whispered. But that uneasy feeling gripped her heart again, and she could not shake it. Late the next afternoon, with dusk fast approaching, she set out as instructed. Her father had insisted that she not delay. There was so much to plan, he said, and the bridegroom's instructions were perfectly clear. Clutching the parchment, she slipped into the silent forest. Leaves rustled overhead and faint streaks of fading sunlight threw shadows across the ground. A biting breeze carried the scent of pine and damp earth, a constant reminder of just how vast these woods were. The directions were painstakingly detailed. Turn where the elm stands near the stream, follow the moonlight past the fallen oak, and so on. She navigated the narrow trail, heart pounding each time the path forked. Once or twice she thought she heard footsteps behind her, soft, crunching echoes that stopped whenever she paused. Yet, when she glanced over her shoulder, there was only a thick tangle of trees. She remembered the bridegroom's parting words. "Stay on the path." Soon the moon rose, bathing branches in a spectral glow. A hush fell over the forest, broken only by distant owl calls. After what felt like hours, she glimpsed a faint light through the trees. Stepping forward, she found a small clearing where a humble cabin stood. Its windows flickered with a weak, wavering glow, as if dim lanterns were lit within. She climbed the porch steps and found the door slightly ajar. The bridegroom had spoken of a warm welcome, yet no voices or signs of activity came from inside, only the quiet hiss of wind seeping through gaps in the walls. Gripping the dagger hidden under her cloak, she pushed the door open. In that moment, shadows seemed to stretch and beckon her onward, an unspoken invitation she dared not ignore. She inhaled, steeling her nerves, and stepped inside, unsure of what secrets might wait in the dark. Chapter 3. A single lantern burned in the front room of the cabin, its weak flame casting wavering shadows along the walls. The merchant's daughter stood at the threshold, her breath hitching at the stale odour that clung to the air, an unsettling mix of damp wood and something metallic she could not name. "Hello?" she ventured softly, one hand still resting on the doorknob. Her voice seemed to vanish in the gloom. Silence answered. She stepped inside, the boards groaning underfoot. The small entryway opened into a sparse sitting room furnished with only a rough-hewn table, a couple of wooden chairs, and a fireplace where embers smouldered faintly. Though someone had recently tended the fire, no sign of the bridegroom or any household members greeted her. Heart pounding, she set her lantern on the table and glanced around, straining to hear any sound of distant conversation. There was none. The quiet pressed in on her like a heavy cloak. Perhaps he's preparing another room, she reasoned, or stepping out for a moment. But the cabin felt strangely deserted, despite its flickering lantern and glowing hearth. She noticed a narrow hallway leading deeper into the structure. "Is anyone here?" she called again, her voice echoing off the wooden walls. Nothing. With each step down the corridor, unease coiled tighter in her chest. The hall was poorly lit, the single candle at its far end spitting shadows onto the floor. She passed a small door on the left, locked or stuck, she couldn't tell, and continued toward a room at the end, half hidden behind a ragged curtain. The floor creaked ominously beneath her boots. A subtle draught made the curtain sway, revealing a dark interior. Swallowing the dread swelling in her throat, she lifted the edge of the fabric and peered inside. At first, the darkness was total. Then her eyes made out a large table in the center of the room, long enough, it seemed, for someone to lie upon. A single dusty window admitted a sliver of moonlight. It fell across the table's surface, and she froze. Long streaks marred the wood, dark stains that trailed off the edges, congealed in a sickening pattern. Her stomach churned. "Is that—" She couldn't bring herself to finish the thought. Pulse roaring in her ears, she forced herself to step closer, biting back the rising panic. As she leaned in, a floorboard gave way with a snap, sending her stumbling. Her fingers brushed something cold and sticky on the table, and she jerked her hand away, heart lurching. A noise in the hall made her gasp. At once, she flattened herself against the wall, ears straining. The sound of shoes against the creaking boards drifted closer, accompanied by hushed voices. "How soon?" came a low voice that prickled her skin. She recognized the bridegroom's smooth tone. "Tonight," responded another voice, a gravelly whisper. "She's here already, isn't she?" A pause, then the bridegroom spoke again, quieter yet. "Yes, but I must see how quickly she'll comply. Our arrangement cannot be delayed. The others are expecting her." The daughter's breath caught in her throat. What arrangement! Fear flooded her veins as the footsteps grew louder, stopping just outside the curtained doorway. She held her breath, sliding further into the darkness. She heard the bridegroom enter the room. His silhouette blocked the dim light spilling in from the hall. He set a lantern on a side table, casting a dull glow over the horrors revealed. A pile of rumpled garments in one corner, torn and stained beyond recognition. Her eyes darted to the table and the glistening marks that told their own dreadful story. "I need to make sure she doesn't suspect," he muttered to his companion. "Play the gracious host, then when the time is right—" He cut himself off, glancing around as though sensing a presence. Her heart thundered so violently she feared he might hear it. A distant thump from the front of the cabin broke the tension. The bridegroom and the other man cursed under their breaths. The man with the gravelly voice said, "Go, I'll tidy this up." They stepped away, the light receding with them. In the flickering glow, she glimpsed the full scope of the carnage, dried pools of something ominously dark across the floor, an empty scabbard tossed aside near the door. This is not a home, she realized with dawning horror. It's a lair. Mustering courage she hardly possessed, she clutched her cloak around her and crept back toward the hallway. I have to leave before he finds me. But as she made her way, a single question seared her mind. Would she manage to escape this place alive? And if she did, who would believe the nightmare she'd witnessed here? Chapter 4. She pressed herself against the rough wooden wall of the cabin corridor, heart drumming in her ears. In the next room, the bridegroom's low voice rumbled, conferring with his accomplice. She strained to catch each word, trembling at the repeated references to her, to plans, to tonight. A sudden scrape on the floorboard sent her pulse racing. Fearing discovery, she inched away from the door and into the darkness beyond. It was then she noticed a faint glow spilling from beneath another door near the back of the corridor. The wood there was splintered, as though forced shut many times. Caution, she thought, yet some instinct compelled her closer. Perhaps it was desperation, or some dim hope she might find a safer exit. She nudged the door gently, and it gave way with a soft creak. A narrow staircase descended to what felt like a cellar. Holding her breath, she slipped inside, drawing the door shut behind her. The stairs groaned as she crept down, lantern in hand. The air below was damp and carried an overpowering stench of decay. She fought a wave of nausea. At the bottom, she found a low passageway braced with rotting beams. Old crates and tattered sacks lined the walls, and in the flickering lantern light, she glimpsed something horrifying. Dark smears on the ground, footprints that led deeper into the gloom. Summoning her courage, she followed them. Her free hand clutched the small dagger beneath her cloak, a feeble comfort. Then her foot struck something solid, a crate knocked ajar. The lid wobbled, and she froze, listening for any sign of movement upstairs. When all remained quiet, she lifted the lantern to peer inside. Her breath caught in her throat. Beneath the scattered straw was a human hand, severed at the wrist, pale fingers curled rigidly around a gold ring. She nearly dropped her lantern in horror, a scream clawing at her throat, but she forced it down. Tears blurred her vision as she realized what it meant. There have been others before me. With trembling hands, she pried the ring free, needing proof of what she'd found. The hand was cold as ice, and the ring slid off reluctantly. It bore an inscription she could not fully make out, but recognized well enough to know it was a personal memento. The terror she'd felt in the upstairs room now seemed minor compared to this grim certainty. The bridegroom was no mere robber. He was a murderer, luring women into the woods and dispatching them with practiced cruelty. Easing the crate's lid back into place, she backed away. Her only thought was escape. I have to show someone, Father, the townspeople, what he truly is. But she also understood the danger of trying to flee too soon. One false move, and she might join the nameless victims in this dreadful cellar. She returned to the staircase, forcing each step to remain silent. As she reached the top, faint candlelight glimmered through a crack in the door, and she heard the bridegroom's voice again, now in conversation with more than one person. Their low tones suggested urgency. "The hour grows late," he said. "We must be certain she can't slip away. The others wait outside. We move soon." A rancid wave of fear washed over her. They were planning to corner her in this labyrinth of halls and rooms, like hunters closing in on a frightened stag. They think I'm unaware, she realized, but I know too much now. Glancing at the severed fingers ring, she steeled herself. I must act quickly. If she didn't leave, the bridegroom would carry out his plan before dawn, and this time there would be no remains left to discover. Slipping into the corridor, she paused to listen. The voices were receding toward the front of the cabin. If she was careful, she might sneak around them and back out into the forest. Yet even as she steadied her nerves for flight, a flicker of grim determination ignited within her. She now possessed a secret, the undeniable proof of the bridegroom's guilt. A single gold ring taken from a cold, lifeless hand. If she escaped, she would show it to everyone back in the village. If they doubted her story, this gruesome keepsake would confirm the truth. Clutching the ring so tightly it bit into her palm, she drew one shuddering breath after another. She had always been the quiet, dutiful daughter, but tonight she carried a dark secret that would seal the bridegroom's doom, if only she managed to slip past him alive. Chapter 5. The moon had barely set when she finally slipped out of the cabin's clutches. Every nerve in her body screamed for her to flee, yet the forest loomed with its own shadows. Steadying her breath, the merchant's daughter peered through a gap in the cabin walls, confirming the bridegroom and his accomplice had moved toward the front. In that tense moment, she clung to the dagger hidden beneath her cloak and carefully eased open the back door. It groaned softly on worn hinges, but the wind rustling the surrounding pines masked her escape. Heart hammering, she ducked outside and into the cold darkness of the woods, guided only by a pale glimmer of moonlight. She trudged through the underbrush, branches snagging her skirt and brambles catching at her sleeves. Each time she tripped, she stifled a gasp, fearing they might hear her. Eventually, she found a narrow deer path under the boughs of ancient oaks. The gnarled roots and swirling fog seemed determined to swallow her whole. Yet the thought of that cabin, its blood-slick table, and the severed hand, now missing its ring, urged her forward. When dawn's first light streaked the sky with muted blues and greys, she emerged onto the main road leading back to the village. Every muscle ached, her eyes burned from lack of sleep, but a surge of relief flooded her when she glimpsed rooftops in the distance, their familiar shapes a promise of safety. Stumbling into her father's house, she found him pacing the entrance hall. He rushed to her, catching her in his arms before she collapsed. "Child, where in heaven's name?" he began, confusion and worry etched on his face. She sucked in a ragged breath. "It's the bridegroom," she managed, her voice frayed with exhaustion. Her trembling hand opened, revealing the ring. "I found this. On a severed hand. Father, I've seen horrors beyond imagining." His eyes widened as he cradled the gold band in his palm. What are you saying?" In halting sentences, she recounted the night, the silent rooms, the blood-smeared table, the bridegroom's conspiratorial whispers, and the grim evidence hidden in the cellar. She relived the terror of sneaking past the very men who intended to dispatch her before dawn. Each confession drew gasps from her father. By the time she finished, he was white as a sheet. "This is unthinkable," he whispered, voice trembling. "A murderer right under our noses?" "We can't keep silent," she said, forcing down the surge of bile that rose every time she pictured the cabin cellar. "Others could vanish just as I nearly did." Her father nodded, shock giving way to resolve. "I'll gather the townsfolk. They must hear what you've witnessed." Within hours, a discreet assembly of neighbors formed inside the merchant's house. Their concerned murmurs echoed against the low-beamed ceiling as they took in the daughter's ragged appearance and the haunted look in her eyes. She recounted her tale again, laying out the ring as proof. The gold caught the midday sun, shining with an incongruous brightness that only deepened the disquiet among the listeners. "This is monstrous," hissed an older woman, pressing trembling fingers to her lips. "We must drive him out now." A few nodded, though some still faltered. The bridegroom's gifts had dazzled the village. His manners and wealth had inspired trust. "Who would believe such a story?" asked a young man in the corner, voice quavering. He seemed so refined. Why would anyone suspect him? The daughter met his gaze. "That's precisely his disguise," she said quietly. "He uses it to lure his victims into isolation." A ripple of unease coursed through the group. "We confront him," declared one of the older men, clenching his fists. "Together, so he cannot slip away or turn the blame on her. If he arrives for the wedding arrangements, we'll be waiting." As evening inched closer, the bridegroom indeed appeared at the merchant's doorstep, fashionably dressed, exuding that same polished air. He seemed surprised to find so many gathered, but he masked it with a gracious smile and a courteous bow. "My dear friends," he said, addressing them smoothly, "what a delightful sight, seeing you all here." Unease prickled through the assembly. Some glared at him, recalling the daughter's words, while others avoided his gaze, ashamed they had ever been duped by his charm. Her father stood protectively at her side. "I trust all is well?" the bridegroom continued, flicking a glance at her. His eyes narrowed for just an instant, a crack in his composure. "He knows," she thought, heart pounding. Summoning every ounce of courage, she stepped forward, the ring in her hand, a symbol of the horror she had uncovered. Her voice shook, but did not waver. "We have something to discuss, sir," she said quietly, but all eyes fell on her. In the hush that followed, the only sound was the bridegroom's measured breath. She felt the weight of the dark secret pressing on her, what she had seen, what she had endured. Now, in this tense gathering, she realized exposing him would demand all her resolve. If she faltered, he might twist the story in his favor. Clutching the ring, she stiffened her spine. "I escaped once," she told herself, "and now I must finish what I started." Chapter 6. The air in the merchant's house thrummed with tension as the bridegroom faced the silent gathering. Candle flames quivered in the uneasy stillness. No one moved. The merchant's daughter stood at the forefront, the damning ring clenched in her trembling hand. This was the moment she had dreaded and prepared for. The moment where dark truths would either see the light or be lost beneath the bridegroom's clever deceptions. He tilted his head, all refined manners and polite curiosity, though a flicker of uncertainty flashed in his eyes. "My dear," he said smoothly, addressing her in a tone laced with false concern. "You look unwell. Shall I fetch a chair?" She swallowed, forcing herself to remain steady. "No," she said quietly, raising her voice enough to command the assembly's attention. "I'm quite certain I can stand." His gaze swept the crowd. "Am I to understand you've gathered everyone simply to stare at me?" A single, pointed laugh escaped him. Nervous shifting rippled through the townsfolk, yet no one answered immediately. Then the merchant cleared his throat and stepped forward. "You have asked for my daughter's hand in marriage," he began, his voice thick with the weight of truth. "But what she has seen, what she has survived, compels us to speak." The bridegroom's jaw twitched, yet he offered a calm, condescending smile. "Please, enlighten me." All eyes turned to the daughter. Her lips felt dry, her heart pounding so fiercely she thought she might faint. Yet the memory of those horrors spurred her on. She squared her shoulders and spoke, each word measured, each recollection burning with clarity. "You led me to your cabin in the forest, told me it was to meet your companions and prepare for our wedding feast," she said. "But when I arrived, I found a silent house with blood-stained floors and chilling secrets beneath it." She paused, forcing breath into her lungs. A wave of shocked mutters spread around the room, though many already knew the gist of her story. She fixed the bridegroom with a piercing stare. "You tried to trap me. You and your accomplice planned to kill me that very night." A hush fell, broken only by the crackle of the fire in the hearth. The bridegroom let out a slow breath. "Such wild tales," he said. "It pains me to see you so distraught by illusions. Perhaps the gloom of the forest stirred your imagination?" "Illusions don't leave behind severed hands," she bit out, voice quivering with anger and revulsion. In a swift movement, she held out the ring for all to see. A golden band, too large for her own slender finger, with an inscription partially worn away. It caught the lamplight, throwing reflections like shimmering accusations. The bridegroom's eyes flickered, recognition flashing across his features. There was no disguising it. "This belonged to one of your victims," she said, her voice swelling with righteous fury. "I found it on a hand, stashed in a crate in your cellar. Do you still deny the truth?" At that, a ripple of gasps tore through the gathered crowd. Several men, including the father, took a step closer to the bridegroom. He held up his hands in mock surrender, but his face had grown dark. "I have never seen that ring in my life," he protested. The daughter turned to the townsfolk, her expression resolute. "There are clothes and weapons rotting away in that cabin, belongings of the ones he's lured into the forest. I saw tables stained with blood. He is no bridegroom, he's a murderer." The hush gave way to outraged whispers. Fear flickered across the bridegroom's face, though he hid it beneath a thin veneer of composure. A current of tension jolted the crowd, who shuffled closer, forming a tightening ring around him. "For too long," the father said, voice trembling with rage, "we judged a man by his wealth and charm. Let us not be fooled again. If my daughter hadn't escaped, she'd be in that cellar with the others. A shout rose. One of the neighbors stepped forward, glaring at the bridegroom. "You'll answer for your crimes!" Another voice chimed in. "We'll drag you back to that cabin so no one can deny what's hidden there." Realizing the circle was closing, the bridegroom made a sudden lunge for the door, but a burly farmer seized his arm. A second neighbor grappled him, wrestling him to the ground. He twisted free with surprising agility and darted toward a side window, smashing its latch. "Out of my way!" he bellowed, his refined mask dropping in an instant. The daughter gasped, stepping back as splinters of wood flew. Others rushed to block him. Yet in the chaos, the bridegroom brandished a hidden blade, eyes wild. More cries rang out, furniture overturned, sending chairs crashing. Even as he threatened those who pressed in on him, he realized there was no easy escape. Too many arms reached out, pinning him in place. Panting, he glared around at the incensed faces. "You fools," he snarled, spittle flecking his lips. "I'd have made this village wealthy had you not pried into matters that don't concern you." The daughter met his glare head-on, her voice trembling with fury. "Your lies have ended. No gold can wash away the blood you've spilled." Two men wrested the blade from his grip, twisting his arm behind his back until he howled. The father took up the ring from where it had fallen near the hearth, lifting it high for all to see. "Your crimes will be laid bare before the entire village and beyond," he declared, fury lacing every syllable. "You'll stand trial for the horrors you've committed, so every family that has lost someone to your treachery may find justice." A hush once again descended on the room, broken only by the bridegroom's labored breath. The daughter, exhausted and trembling, sank into her father's arms. The ring gleamed in the lantern light, a silent emblem of what she had endured and what she had finally exposed. By the time dusk settled that same day, word had spread across the village. The bridegroom, robber, killer, or both, was locked securely under guard, awaiting the harsh judgment that would undoubtedly follow. Neighbors gathered around the merchant's house, whispering of vengeful spirits, of all the nameless victims lost in those dark woods. Yet for the first time there was unity in their watchfulness. No one questioned the daughter's story now. She sat at the window, staring out at the torchlit vigil. Though her body still trembled with fatigue and lingering terror, a quiet resolve steadied her heart. "I have survived," she told herself. She thought of those unfortunate souls left behind in that cursed cabin and clutched the ring, the proof that had unveiled the bridegroom's evil for all to see. She would speak for them if ever her courage was questioned, would fight on their behalf if justice faltered. The night lengthened, and torches outside flickered like fireflies in the gloom. A deep relief mingled with sorrow as she closed her eyes. Whatever the future held, she would no longer be that timid girl who had passively accepted her father's ambitions. She had peered into the darkness and escaped with a truth worth sharing, one that would save others from a grim fate. In that final reckoning, she had found a voice to shatter the silence, and no amount of wealth, charm, or cunning could ever silence it again. Farewell, dear traveller. Your journey may pause for now, but the echoes of our adventures linger like stardust on the wind. Until our paths cross again in another chapter of mystery and wonder, may your dreams be filled with magic and your heart ever brave. Good night, and safe travels on your next thrilling quest.